Alessandro. So here we are again during Christmas.
Why are you speaking English?
Well, that's gonna be the first official episode. That's the gift for our Italian audience and our non-Italian audience that does not exist. Basically, it's a gift for them for Christmas. So I hope everybody's gonna be able to pick up with our beautiful, not accent-based English. And today we're gonna talk about a topic actually that I think we all faced at one point during our career. So the transition from individual contributor to more of a leadership role, or better to say, as an enabler.
I'm really excited today to have our guest, Dave Cusack. We've been both very lucky to work with him, and we really grew thanks to him as well, professionally. And I'm pleased to welcome Dave Cusack on the show.
Welcome, Dave.
Hey Ali, hey Marco. Thanks a million for having me. I'm looking forward to having a chat. This is my first time doing anything like this, so hopefully I don't butcher it, but very pleased to be here. Thank you.
So maybe Dave, let's start talking about a bit of your experience, where you're coming from, and what was your walk of life so far.
Yeah, sure. So a quick summary of my career to date is I studied computer science in university, got a graduate position in an Irish gaming company, gambling, not actual computer games, and then from there went into finance, some educational software, and more recently into aviation. And throughout that kind of journey, been at a number of different companies in a number of different roles, from application development to infrastructure automation, to team leads of both infrastructure and application teams, and more recently in a software development management position. Just to say, as a caveat, any views expressed in the podcast are my own and don't necessarily reflect that of my current company.
No, that's all your company views. Come on, be honest.
No. It's based on my experience, right?
Yeah. Well, we are all based on our experience, and that's why our company hired us, right? Because we have good experience. So it's really interesting because I think we all met in a phase on our career where we were kind of starting or in the middle of the transition from individual contributor to a more leadership role, as we were saying, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's been really interesting to see how difficult it was at the beginning, right? Because you start from be responsible for your own work to be responsible for your own work plus for everybody else's work, or a couple of other engineers, 3-4 other engineers. So how was for you this kind of transition? How did you feel about it, and what did you find interesting about it?
Yeah, the perspective change is interesting. Like going from your kind of sphere of influence changes. Okay, so I mean, in individual contributor, you have kind of a singular but important focus, which is whatever story or task you're working on, and you have to have some connection to what the overall objective is towards that story or task. And I think when you're stepping into more of a people leadership or technical leadership role, like your sphere of influence increases from kind of that product centric view of what you're doing to being more inclusive of the business context, as well as just the technical context for what you're working on. And that's interesting, and I think there's growth in that transition. As a person in technology, I think that's really interesting, and that's one of the reasons why I got more interested in personally the leadership track for IT.
Yeah, what I always found astonishing for me is that how the perception of people change about what you are saying. And I remember exactly one case, and I'm not gonna say what happened, but a few years ago I'd been appointed director of engineer or head of engineering of my company at the time, and I remember that things change from a day to another. So basically, what I was saying the day before was perceived completely different just because I had that type of role. So and it was a small company. We're talking about a reasonably small company. To give an idea of how much difference can make just to be appointed as a leader, let's say, official leader, because I know that we all agree about leadership as an emergent factor rather than something that you put on people.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. But yeah, happy to get into it later. I think like some of the, just thinking about my own journey, I think like one of the first experiences I had in terms of any type of leadership, even on a team where I didn't have a title or responsibility as a leader, was we used to rotate on one of the first teams I was on, responsibility for facilitating retrospectives, and I really think that was my first professional exposure to a type of leadership. Right, there are a few. There's a leadership comes in many facets, but like one of the I think that was my real kind of bridge into facilitating, which is a skill that I lean on quite a lot in the roles that I've had and my current role. But like, yeah, rotating facilitation for retrospectives was my first kind of exposure to it. One that I really enjoyed, and I think that's probably why I progressed to it and emerged into this career path, right? But that was my first kind of exposure to it.
I was thinking just briefly about my experience on this when Marco, you were asking, Dave, and it's funny. I think of the way I used to perceive managers. Specifically, I was like, I strongly believed that strong engineering teams didn't need managers at all. But I know I'm wrong, considering my experiences so far. But I was one of those believing that managers are not needed when you're all very, very strong and aligned.
When you asked me to come on and be on the podcast, I was doing a bit of reading on a book that I've read before, but I went back to have a look at some of the popular highlights on the Kindle version of it. So it's Peopleware by two people, Tom DeMarco and Tom Lester. But there's a quote from it saying that the manager's function is not to make people work, but to make it possible for people to work. And I think that's a big distinction, right? And which type of manager you've experienced probably heavily influences your opinion of that kind of role, right? And especially until you actually experience that responsibility, I think it's hard to have empathy for it, depending on your experience in your career to date, right?
Yeah, I think also the size of the company and the context you work in, they all feed into this sort of opinion.
Yeah, I personally thought that when I wasn't a manager, I thought the manager was kind of useless, right? It's a bit what you were saying, Ale. But then, you become one, and you kind of start to understanding, to get more understanding, as you Dave was saying, when you experience then. What the actual role is.
It depends. I mean, I think like all of us, we've all had previous jobs, like when we were in college as well. So like if you've worked in retail or in fast food or whatever job you had when you were working your way through college, like the perception from that experience in the workforce can really kind of influence you as well with your perception of managers, right? Because it's a completely different context and and it's a different responsibility, different role. But like, I mean, definitely I would have felt the same coming from that background into software engineering. More professional.
Yeah, but this is extremely interesting because one of the as you were saying, I used to work in a supermarket, right, in the past.
Sure.
And the pattern over there in terms of management is really a command control approach. So it's really top down, and they tell you do. That's it. There is one person that talks, the other one executes. But I think in our field, it's a bit different. I don't think it's all around different because I still work with people that had this kind of approach, really a top-down approach, which I really despise. And this is my personal opinion again. But I think something that is emerging even more and more in the latest year, probably in the last 10 years in our field, is what is called servant leadership. Mm-hmm. Which is basically it's a completely turnaround on how the leadership and the management worked up to a few years ago. So what is your experience with it?
Yeah, like the concept of servant leadership is a really interesting one. Like if you're basically comparing and contrasting it based on what you said, Marco, between like traditional command and control versus I guess what's called mission control, right, where you try and outline what the objective is, and it goes back to some of the military tactics from many different kind of militaries throughout history. But like you identify what the mission is and let people self-organize to achieve that objective, right? So it's more objective orientated rather than, or outcome orientated than it's outcome orientated rather than output orientated, right? Where the first one can be more about the output, right? And it's pretty interesting. I think one of the first exposures I had to it was like being on a Scrum team, right? So there's actually a dedicated role on the Scrum team, right, that we've all had some exposure to, that is kind of by definition a servant leader, and that's the Scrum Master. So like the Scrum Master doesn't have any decision rights in per se. It's a kind of implied, and they have a lot of influence, but they don't make decisions in isolation, and it is a servant leadership role by definition, I think, right? So, in terms of facilitating the stand-ups, the retrospectives, the planning sessions, and helping the team come to some consensus or direction. And there's lots of other inputs that go into that role, but like, and I've worked in teams that don't have Scrum Masters, but other people have assumed those types of responsibilities inherently based on their experience, but I think that's the first role I've kind of experienced in my career where it was by definition kind of a servant role, and like I think it's very valuable. I'm not going to stand here and say Scrum is the best way to do things. There's lots of opinions about that, and I don't currently work in Scrum, but I have. But it's definitely by definition a servant leadership role.
I think one of the most sort of interesting aspects of the the servant leadership sort of approach is that if we contextualize it in the technology-driven companies that we have experience with, considering the amount of information we have to, like, the organizations have to deal with, as well as the speed at which the market changes, a top-down approach doesn't really scale to face, the changes in requirements and in market demand. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of the servant leadership is actually, empowering individuals to make decisions and react to changes instead of just waiting for a manager from above to tell you what to do, basically, all the times.
Yeah, I think it's, it comes down to, I think, like, abstracting it from the kind of Scrum example I gave, like, you're talking about basically giving a team whatever dimension that team is, whether it's a team of 5 or maybe it's a team of teams, like, but giving them the environment in which they can be successful, right? And basically I think the role of the servant leader is to kind of be the caretaker for that environment per se, so you're trying to make sure that, almost using the Scrum Master example, that there's no blockages, but you're abstracting it to a different level. You need to make sure that the team is well staffed. You need to make sure that there's a kind of a positive culture, and to help enable that, you might need to make sure that people can go on training when it's appropriate. So like there's this idea of kind of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and kind of facilitating the team or the people to be able to achieve those things. Obviously, the context you're in can dictate to what degree you'd be successful in those areas, right? I mean, whether it's a startup or a big enterprise or whatever, it has a lot of sway over where you have control, right? But I think those areas and that's the idea I have in my head when I think about a servant leader, right? Is basically a caretaker for the environment in which people can be successful. And in the context of software engineering, that's engineers or a product development team building something that's useful, right?
You mentioned something which is really important, in my opinion, at least, and it's the concept of team of teams.
Sure.
Actually, there is a book, a really famous book from McChrystal, if I remember well.
Yeah, he's an ex-military guy,
from
right?
the United States.
Yeah.
And that's the analogy that you were making about the military, how the military runs their operations. And in that book, they talk about how the United States have a different way of running military versus the Al-Qaeda. That's this kind of cell, independent cell, that they were doing their own stuff, but they had the same mission rather than have the same, as you say, the outcome from what they were trying to achieve. I mean, it was just the mission, the vision of what they were trying to achieve. And that's really an interesting book. But talking about this is. When I think about what you are saying, servant leadership in general, and autonomy, mastery, and purpose, you mentioned as well, there are a couple of things that come up in my mind, and which I think are fundamental to make all this engine and this type of approach works. And is probably the two things that people that transition from individual contributor to a leadership role struggle the most to get, or at least is one of them I struggled with them at least. And it's trust and delegation, which they go together, right?
Sure.
It's so trust in the sense that you have to trust people to do things on your behalf, because you are not anymore in control of the details, the granular details work and execution that you are doing. And delegation is that you don't have to control them. You need to let them do it. It's not just that you trust them, but you need to let them do it as well. Maybe for you it was a bit easier because, as you were saying, you were a scrum master, or anyway a facilitator, which by definition is what it does.
Yeah, like there's a couple of practices that actually that have been kind of common throughout my career that I think have really become tenets of if I'm going to work somewhere, I would hope to see aspects of these things, right? So I mean, there's the transparency is one of them, right? So if displaying all the work and being honest about it, trying to get an understanding of what unplanned work is for a team, and I've used successfully Kanban as a mechanism to do that. Now I'm not going to say you should swap everything to Kanban, but it's a tool that I've used in the past, and it's been successful in being transparent, or at least providing a level of transparency. And I think that's really important when you're building trust, right? Transparency and trust, I think they go together. And then there's this the other aspect of trust is delivering, right? So you don't just get given trust, right? You kind of have to earn it. So like one of the ways that you can earn it is by being consistent in certain aspects of your delivery. So like continuous delivery and the kind of things that go along with it are another way that you can build up trust as a team, right? So short incremental delivery cycles and having all the good stuff that goes along with continuous delivery, like the certain aspects of testing, be it unit testing, integration testing, and acceptance testing, along with the regular release cadence, I think can really help build up an organizational trust, so that you don't have to ask for that ability to go after something in terms of autonomy. You're gonna get it because nobody wants to micromanage, right? But you can earn that as okay. Ideally, people don't want to micromanage, I think, right? So and we're talking about trust. So I think those are two practices and kind of capabilities that I've experienced in my career that have helped build those things, right? It's trust in terms of delivery and trust in terms of autonomy.
It's nice because that's the positive aspect. That's why we like so much Dave, because it's really, really positive. I think there are lots of control freaks around. To be honest, I think people do actually want to control stuff sometimes. But I totally agree with what you're saying. It's just a different view on people. And
I've recently come across another sort of basically there's a scale, a spectrum, that tells you, sort of the approach that you can choose when basically, you need to do something as a team. You need to build something, for example. And depending on, usually it depends on how mature the team is. So there are these 7 levels of approach. It starts from tell. Goes through sell, consult, agree, advise, inquire, and then delegate. So if you choose tell, it's because you don't really trust the team. You make a decision yourself. You might explain your motivation, but then the team just needs to execute basically on the decision. Then there is a little, a sort of a little upgrade on that, which is sell, which is basically you still make the decision, but you spend time selling that decision to the team, so that the team sort of buys into the decision. But still, you have made the decision. The team is just executing, but feels a little bit more involved basically in the decision. Then there is consult, in which you will still make the decision on your own, but you consult with the team first. You understand what the general opinions in the team are, and then you use that as an input for your own for yourself to make the decision in the end. There is agree then, which is the fourth level, which basically has everyone involved, and you sort of reach a consensus in the team. But here, this is possibly the first step where you are sort of not telling anymore what to do. You as a team, you agree on what to do. Then there is the fifth level. It's called advice. And basically you offer, you start stepping back, you offer your opinion to the rest of the team, right? And they might listen to your opinion or not, but they will take the decision. They will make the decision, at this level. Then there is inquire. So basically, you leave to the others to decide, and then you ask them to convince yourself about the decision, basically. But you still leave them to decide, but they need to make a little bit more effort in terms of convincing you, that was the right decision. And finally, when you fully trust your team, you delegate completely. And basically, you might you might decide that for a certain specific thing, the team is fully empowered to make their own decisions, and there's really nothing to be done in that sense. I found it like an interesting framework to.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you go through the different levels there. I actually got to do some training recently. It was like agile at scale by an agile coach that worked at Spotify. And one of the things that they did at Spotify, which is pretty interesting, was that they kind of explicitly map out the sphere of influence that each kind of level of their teams have, right? So there's the way that they enable their autonomy of their, you've probably heard of the kind of pods aspect. So there's like chapters and pods or whatever, but basically the idea of a pod is or squads, right? It's an autonomous team that has some objective, and that team, the understanding of what kind of sphere of influence they have is kind of well understood, right? So they kind of know when they have to step outside that to ask for permission or escalate, I think, right? And kind of what I'm getting to is that leadership in the context of software development, when there's a high trust organization, a team will escalate when they know it's appropriate, rather than it being kind of an ever-present, this kind of influence over the decision-making process, right? There's kind of I think a servant leader in the context of this decision process might be a participant and break deadlocks if there's a decision that can't be made, or maybe you will add some business context that the other team might not have visibility of, right? So because they participate in a different level of conversation sometimes, right? So it could just be like filling knowledge gaps or providing some context. But yeah, I just think that Spotify have done it really well, where they've basically got to or it sounds like, I've never been to Spotify, I haven't worked there, but the training was good, right? So, but basically having well-defined boundaries of control, I guess, right? That are well understood but aren't kind of rigid, and then having well understood escalation paths for different contexts.
Yeah. So I think this is a really interesting topic, and what it's at the moment I'm really interested in is how to build those kind of team that you were talking about, not only at scale, in a fast-growing company, but also in a reasonable time, because those things, to come up with a team that is able to take their own decision, it's able to know when to push the red button, or when they can handle it by themselves and so forth, it takes time. You really need time, because you don't just need the people to grow, but the people have to grow with the team as well. So the team has to grow, but the people within has to grow. So both of them need to grow together, and they need to go in the same direction. So sometimes business requires those processes to go faster than they actually organically needs to work. Yeah. So how can you, if you have an answer, I don't, but how do you think we can accelerate this type of process, and how can we do that? I found it really difficult, to be honest.
Yeah, like, I mean, obviously I just have my own kind of experience and opinion, right? There's no, I think, silver bullet to that. I think my answer to you might be, or it's not an answer, but my conversation point back to you might be unsatisfying. But I think it really depends on the context that you're in, right? So if you're the business you're in, like the commitments that your business already has, that you're expected to meet, what constraints do you have to play with, like, right? If there's fixed delivery dates, you have to compromise on some things, whether it's scope or whatever. But in terms of developing a culture on the team towards a high trust organization, like, it depends on the level, right? I think if that's something that you wanted to achieve across an organization, like that does take a lot of investment, right? And it needs to have kind of buy-in from the kind of in terms of the approach that you're going to take to it from the kind of leadership, the higher leadership team, at whatever level you're talking about. If it's a startup, maybe the CTO needs to be involved. If it's a enterprise level, like 150 people in an engineering department, you're going to need the head of engineering buy-in, or maybe the VP of product, or whatever it is, right? But I think you'll need some leadership buy-in if it goes outside of one or two teams. If you're talking about the team level, having at the kind of the unit level, like having a motivated and interested leader in that team, a team lead, can really facilitate quite a cool culture on the team. Like, maybe that's by having informal coffee chats a couple times a week, or having their own team identity. I kind of refer back to that book Peopleware for like ways of building strong team cohesion, and there's loads of ideas in that book that talk about these kind of little rituals a team can have that builds their own identity and a sense of purpose, right? But I think as you try and abstract that outside of an individual unit to a broader organizational level change, like, that's difficult, right? And that's why there's whole consultancies around the topic, and why people pay big money to try and do those things, right? You hear about these change budgets or change initiatives, and like, that's hard. And change at that level starts. So it really depends on the appetite of the business at the time and the existing commitments. Obviously, you're going to get higher quality results from a high trust organization, you would assume, and that's been my experience. But it doesn't come for free, right? I mean, I think at the unit level, there's things that a team lead, because maybe a team lead doesn't have control over or influence over that level of leadership in their organization. But there's things that if someone's an individual or a team lead of an individual team, there's things that they can do to make their team's experience better, but maybe they don't have an influence over the kind of wider organization. But it depends on the level, in my experience.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But that's exactly what I usually do, and pulls me another question. It raises another question. Then is all those things you were talking about, informal chats and stuff like that. Yeah, that's basically what we always do. You try to create a relationship that goes beyond the working relationship, right? Because at the end we are all human beings. So, and we like it or not, we need to spend 8-9 hours a day together, or at least 5 days a week. So you need to build this kind of relationship, and those are important and need to be healthy relationships, right? However, nowadays in the COVID era, how can you build this type of relationship when you don't meet people? You can't pop by their desk and say, how are you doing? What's up today? You cannot do it, or you don't find them in the corridor or in the kitchen getting a tea or a coffee. So how can you build that thing? You need to create dedicated spaces, because that's what I do. I create dedicated spacing during the days where we meet, not to talk about work, but we meet to talk about any other type of topic.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, I think you have to try and, it's COVID's the first time I've been working remotely, so I think, like everyone else, been adjusting to that reality. And like, I think as you would invest time in that in an office or with a team, you need to find ways to mimic the same type of interaction with people on your team, like you're saying, Marco, by making time for it. Like, realizing that it's an important aspect of being a team, right? Is making time to to understand the people on your that you're working with at that level. Like, I mean, you don't want to be doing that for every single person in your organization probably, but the people you work closest to, yeah, you probably want to make some time, whether it's 15 minutes a week to have a coffee on a Zoom call where you just talk about anything else but work, or participating in social events that are done hosted remotely. Like, I've seen some of those types of things be quite successful at the company I'm at currently, and like I think it's deliberate. You have to be deliberate about it. I think you can't just assume it's going to happen naturally, because it won't, especially remote, right? Maybe in an office, that type of thing can be contagious and people just get kind of assumed or incorporated. It's deliberate, I think, right? So, I mean, like you're saying, I think you just need to be, recognize it's valuable and then make time for it.
Yeah. I think what we have to do in our position to, and I think that's fundamental for leaders, is to have a high level of empathy for the colleagues. I mean, I always say that if you don't empathize with the people from a human point of view, right? There's no way they can follow you. There's no way they can trust you. There's no way I think they will really appreciate you and appreciate what you're trying to do for them.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, I think. Yeah, I don't know if this is kosher or not, but like I remember in college someone saying that, like, you could be a brilliant asshole, right? But nobody wants to work with a brilliant asshole. Like, people want to work with a team that's kind of a team of people that get on together and are working towards a common goal, right? And let them achieve the things like purpose, autonomy, and mastery, right? I mean, I think. And being empathetic is a big part of that, right? So being able to work well with your colleagues is hugely important at every level in any work probably, but particularly in software engineering, where there's collaboration at not only the engineering level, but you're collaborating with other functions as well, like product and the business, making sure you're working towards the same goals. Like, So I just think that, like, empathy is hugely important.
And I'd say one other aspect of working remotely that I think you have to be deliberate about is, as you were mentioning before, Dave, is making sure that the business context of the decision is well understood, because I think that there's quite a huge risk of basically letting it slip and keeping it implicit. Basically, there's a high risk you keep it implicit accidentally, but I think when you don't share the business context of the decisions, the people in the team lose the connection basically with the decision, and they might not be, maybe technologically they might not be the best decisions, but possibly they make much more sense from a business point of view. And I've seen in certain contexts people getting passionate about these sort of decisions not meeting their expectations, basically.
You're right, Ali. I think this goes back to the kind of command and control versus mission control, right? I think understanding what the actual objective you're trying to reach is will help. And I think we've all been there at different points in our career, right, where we haven't necessarily had clarity on the why we're doing something, and that can lead to you making kind of incorrect assumptions, either whether that's about a technology choice or a feature, and I think really being as clear as you can be, and there's no reason you shouldn't, I mean, unless it's like super sensitive or super secret for some reason, like there's no reason you shouldn't be, like, and having a clear understanding of the reason why we're trying to do something means that people can make valid decisions at the ground level, right? So the whole way down the tree, like, you want that to be as clear as possible so that people can make informed decisions with the best intentions, right? Whether, like you said, going to your example around having debates around technologies, like, or making compromises. I mean, I think there's an interesting concept in a book called Lean Enterprise, talking about the kind of life cycle of product development, right? So you have a phase of discovery where you're trying to find a product market fit. Then you find product market fit, and you bring an idea into what's called the exploit phase in this model, where you invest more money and time and people, and you're trying to get a return on it. And then eventually that'll go into what they call sustain, where it's your breadwinner, and this is kind of how your company makes their money now. And then the last one, which I think a lot of people struggle with, is the retire, right? I think everyone struggles with retire, but I think understanding that life cycle and how you're what you're working on fits into it, helps you understand the context of the decisions that you're making. So maybe you want to invest less than deliberately in quality and discovery because you're going to rebuild whatever it is. I mean, it depends on the context, right? Obviously, that's not a model that you want to follow all the time, but like the kind of quality gates increase as you're going across that to the right of that product lifecycle. And I think understanding the why and the purpose really feeds into that.
I think it's been a great conversation, but we're almost at the end. It's been extremely pleasant to talk to you, Dave. It's always a pleasure. You're always welcome on our podcast. Thank you very much for all the advice that you gave us today, but also all the ones that you provided to us in the past.
Yeah, just to say thanks a million for having me on. It was both daunting and fun, so it's always good to catch up. And look, guys, happy Christmas, happy New Year. I hope you have a good break.
Okay, and as usual, don't forget to follow us, and you can also start following Dave everywhere when he goes back home from work or whenever.
We will include the address in the description of the episode.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Happy Christmas.